A house can be silent for so long that it forgets what laughter sounds like. That was the first thing I thought the night I stepped into the Moretti mansion. Rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the city lights beyond them into blurred streaks of gold and silver. The mansion sat on a hill overlooking Manhattan, its stone walls glowing beneath carefully placed landscape lights. From the outside, it looked like something from a magazine. Perfect. Untouchable. The kind of place people slowed their cars to admire. Inside, it felt different. Colder. Not because of the temperature. Because of the silence. I adjusted the strap of my worn tote bag and glanced down at Noah standing beside me. At 3 years old, he was clutching a stuffed bear almost as big as his torso. His blonde curls stuck out beneath a tiny blue hood, and his wide green eyes moved everywhere at once. "Mommy, this house is huge," he whispered. I smiled despite my nerves. "Remember what we talked about?" He nodded seriously. "Be good. Be quiet. Don't touch stuff." Exactly. The words sounded confident, but my stomach was tied in knots. I had only been working for the Moretti estate for 6 days. 6 days of cleaning guest rooms nobody used, dusting shelves filled with books nobody touched, and polishing surfaces so spotless they barely looked real. The pay was better than any job I had ever found. Better than the diner. Better than the grocery store. Better than juggling 2 part-time jobs while praying the rent cleared. It was the reason Noah and I still had an apartment. Tonight, however, my babysitter had canceled at the last minute. I had no family nearby. No backup plan. No choice. The elderly house manager, Mrs. Whitaker, had reluctantly agreed to let Noah stay with me for a few hours as long as he remained out of sight. "The boss values order," she had warned. "He doesn't like surprises." The boss. Everyone referred to him that way. Adrian Moretti. I had seen him only twice. Once crossing the grand staircase in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Once leaving through the front entrance surrounded by men who moved with the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to responsibility. He never looked rushed. Never looked uncertain. He carried himself like a man who expected the world to make room when he walked through it. Yet somehow, despite all that power, the mansion felt empty. Noah tugged my sleeve. "Does he live here all by himself?" I looked around the enormous foyer. Marble floors. Crystal chandeliers. A staircase curving upward like something from a movie. "I think so." Noah frowned. "That's sad." I almost laughed. Sad was not a word I would have associated with Adrian Moretti. Powerful. Intimidating. Reserved. Certainly. But not sad. Still, as I led Noah deeper into the mansion, passing room after room illuminated by warm lamps, yet completely vacant, his comment lingered in my mind. Because the truth was, despite its beauty, despite its wealth, despite everything it possessed, the house felt like it was waiting for something. Or someone. And I had no idea that before the week was over, my little boy would become the one person capable of changing everything. The next 2 hours passed quietly. I worked my way through the East Wing, dusting shelves, folding blankets, and straightening rooms so immaculate that it felt almost pointless. Noah sat on a thick rug in the corner of a sitting room, lining up toy cars he had brought from home. Every few minutes he made soft engine noises before glancing at me to make sure he was not being too loud. Outside, the rain continued falling against the windows in a steady rhythm. The mansion remained as silent as ever. Around 8:30, Mrs. Whitaker appeared in the doorway holding a silver tray. Her gray hair was pulled into the same perfect bun she wore every day. "The boss returned early," she said quietly. My stomach tightened. "Is there anything special you need me to do?" "No. Just stay focused on your work." Her eyes drifted toward Noah. "And keep him occupied." Noah offered her a cheerful wave. Mrs. Whitaker softened slightly before disappearing down the hallway. 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps. Not hurried. Not heavy. Deliberate. Confident. The sound seemed to travel through the mansion itself. Every staff member suddenly moved with a little more purpose. I glanced up from polishing a side table and saw him for the first time that evening. Adrian Moretti stepped into the sitting room, carrying a dark overcoat over one arm. He looked exactly as composed as always. Tall. Impeccably dressed. Dark hair neatly swept back. The kind of presence that drew attention without demanding it. His eyes moved across the room with quiet awareness. They landed on me briefly. Then on Noah. For a moment nobody spoke. My pulse jumped. I immediately stood. I am sorry, sir. My babysitter canceled, and I did not have anyone else. He will not be any trouble. Adrian studied me for a second. Then he looked at Noah. Noah looked right back. No fear. No hesitation. Just curiosity. Are you the owner of the giant house? Noah asked. My heart nearly stopped. Noah, I whispered. Adrian blinked once. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. I suppose I am. Noah nodded thoughtfully. It is too big. Silence followed. I wanted the floor to open and swallow me whole. Adrian glanced around the room. Too big. Yes. Noah hugged his stuffed bear. There is nobody here. Adrian said nothing. Noah continued. Our apartment is small. Mommy says it is cramped. But it feels happier. I closed my eyes for a second. There went my job. Instead, something strange happened. Adrian pulled out a chair and sat down. Not because he looked relaxed. More because he suddenly seemed tired. The kind of tired that sleep could not fix. Does it? He asked. Noah nodded again. You need more people. Adrian stared at him for several seconds. Then he looked away toward the rain-streaked windows. The room grew quiet. Something shifted in his expression so quickly I almost missed it. Not anger. Not annoyance. Something closer to sadness. Deep and hidden. The kind that had been carried for years. Finally he stood. Your son can stay, he said calmly. Relief rushed through me. Thank you, sir. Adrian looked at Noah one last time. What is your bear's name? Noah smiled. Captain Pickles. For the first time, I saw a genuine smile touch Adrian Moretti's face. It lasted less than a second before disappearing. But it was enough to make me realize something. The mansion was not empty because nobody lived there. It was empty because the man who owned it had forgotten how. Over the next week, something unusual happened. Noah became part of the rhythm of the mansion. Not every day, not for long, just enough to leave traces behind. A toy car forgotten beneath a side table. A crayon sitting beside a stack of business magazines. Tiny fingerprints on a window overlooking the city. The kind of things most people would never notice. But I noticed them because they did not belong in a place like this. And somehow, neither did we. Every evening after daycare, Noah would sit quietly while I worked. Most nights Adrian was nowhere to be seen. Sometimes I caught glimpses of him crossing distant hallways or stepping into meetings behind closed doors. Other times the mansion felt as if he had vanished completely. Yet little by little, I began noticing something else. The house was changing. One Tuesday evening, I was dusting bookshelves in the library when Noah wandered over carrying Captain Pickles beneath one arm. The library was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling shelves stretched nearly 20 feet high. Rolling ladders sat against polished wood. A fire crackled softly inside a stone fireplace. Noah spun in a slow circle. How many books are here? He asked. Thousands, I replied. Has he read them all? Probably not. Then why keep them? I laughed softly. I do not know. At that exact moment, a voice answered from behind us. Because getting rid of them would take too long. I jumped slightly. Adrian stood near the doorway holding a cup of coffee. Noah smiled immediately. Hi, giant house man. I nearly dropped my dust cloth. Adrian took a sip of coffee. Hello, Captain Pickles. Noah grinned. That is not me. That is him. He lifted the bear. Adrian looked at the stuffed animal seriously. My mistake. Noah giggled. The sound echoed through the library. For a second, something changed in the room. It felt lighter somehow. Adrian glanced toward the shelves. Do you like stories? Noah nodded enthusiastically. The dinosaur ones. Adrian walked to a nearby bookshelf and pulled out a large illustrated children's book. He studied the cover for a moment before handing it over. Try this one. Noah accepted it like treasure. Thank you. Adrian nodded once before leaving the room. The entire exchange lasted less than a minute. Yet after he disappeared, I noticed something strange. The coffee cup he had been carrying was still half full, almost untouched, as if he had come into the library for another reason entirely. Later that night, while cleaning the upstairs hallway, I passed an open office door. Adrian sat behind a massive desk surrounded by city lights visible through tall windows. Papers covered every surface. 2 computer monitors glowed beside him. He looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like someone carrying a weight nobody else could see. He stared out at the skyline for so long that I wondered if he even realized the screens had gone dark. Then I heard small footsteps. Noah had slipped away from the play area. Before I could stop him, he peeked through the office doorway. Why are you always alone? He asked. The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Adrian slowly looked up. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Adrian leaned back in his chair and looked past Noah toward the city beyond the glass. That is a very complicated question. Noah considered this carefully. Okay. He pointed at Captain Pickles. He gets lonely too. Adrian's eyes settled on the stuffed bear. Something unreadable flickered across his face. Then he quietly said, I know. And for the first time since I had arrived at the mansion, I wondered what kind of loneliness could exist inside a man who seemed to have everything. By the end of the second week, the mansion no longer looked the same. It still had the polished marble floors, the expensive artwork, the endless hallways lined with antique furniture. But now there were signs of life tucked into unexpected places. A coloring book sat on a coffee table in the sunroom. A tiny pair of sneakers occasionally appeared near the entrance. Once, I even found Captain Pickles sitting upright in a leather chair as if he had attended a business meeting. Every time I discovered one of Noah's little invasions, I hurried to clean them up before anyone important noticed. Yet strangely, nobody ever complained. Not Mrs. Whitaker, not the security staff, not even Adrian. In fact, some evenings I caught him quietly observing the evidence. One Thursday night, I entered the breakfast room carrying fresh linens and froze. Noah had covered half the long dining table with crayons and construction paper. Bright blue dinosaurs marched across one page. Green stick figures covered another. A giant yellow sun smiled from the center of a third drawing. My heart sank. Noah. He looked up immediately. What? You cannot spread all your art across this table. Why? Before I could answer, another voice spoke. Because important people are supposed to sit there. Adrian stood in the doorway holding a tablet. Noah considered this seriously. Do important people color? Adrian glanced at the papers. Not usually. Noah pushed a green crayon toward him. Maybe they should. I nearly stopped breathing. Adrian stared at the crayon for a moment. Then, to my complete shock, he walked over and sat down. Noah immediately slid a blank piece of paper in front of him. Draw something. Adrian looked at the page as if it contained a foreign language. I do not think I remember how. Everybody remembers. Noah said it with absolute confidence. The room fell silent. Then Adrian picked up the crayon. His hand moved slowly at first. A few simple lines. A rectangle. Windows. A roof. Noah leaned closer. That is a house. Adrian nodded. Very good. It looks lonely. The green crayon stopped moving. The words hung in the air. Noah did not notice. He was already reaching for another color. But I noticed. And so did Adrian. Something distant passed through his eyes before disappearing again. Later that evening, while gathering supplies from the second floor, I found Noah standing near the west hallway. A hallway rarely used by anyone. The lights there were softer. The air quieter. The walls displayed old family photographs in elegant silver frames. What are you doing? I asked. Noah pointed ahead. That door. At the end of the hallway stood a large wooden door unlike any other in the mansion. It remained closed every day, always locked, always untouched. Even the housekeeping staff avoided it. We do not go over there, I said gently. Noah frowned. Why? Because it is private. He stared at the door. Whose room is it? I opened my mouth, but realized I did not know. In 2 weeks I had never asked. Never dared. Just then I heard footsteps approaching. Adrian appeared from around the corner and immediately followed Noah's gaze toward the closed door. The change in his expression happened instantly. His features hardened. Not with anger. With pain. Quiet pain. The kind people try very hard to hide. Noah pointed. Who lives in there? For several seconds Adrian did not answer. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. Finally he walked forward and rested one hand against the polished wood. His voice was calm. Almost too calm. Nobody. Noah tilted his head. Then why keep it locked? Adrian's eyes remained fixed on the door. A long silence followed. Then he quietly replied. Because some memories are difficult to leave behind. And for the first time since arriving at the mansion, I realized there was a story hidden behind that door. A story Adrian Moretti had spent years trying not to tell. The question lingered in my mind long after that night. Because some memories are difficult to leave behind. Adrian had said it so quietly, yet the words seemed to echo through the mansion long after he walked away. The following afternoon, rain clouds gathered over the city again. Gray light filtered through the tall windows, softening the edges of every room. Noah and I arrived just before 5. As usual, he carried Captain Pickles under one arm and enough curiosity to fill the entire building. "Do you think the locked room is lonely?" he asked as we entered the foyer. I nearly laughed. Only a 3-year-old could ask a question like that. Rooms do not get lonely. Noah thought about it. Maybe people inside them do. Before I could respond, Mrs. Whitaker appeared carrying a stack of folded towels. She paused when she heard him. For a moment, an unreadable expression crossed her face. Then she simply said, "Some rooms hold important memories." Noah nodded as though this confirmed everything. The evening passed quietly. I worked in the north wing while Noah colored at a small table nearby. Around 7 o'clock, Mrs. Whitaker asked me to deliver fresh linens to the second floor. Noah followed beside me, humming softly to himself. When we reached the west hallway, he immediately noticed the familiar door. Still closed. Still silent. "Nobody goes in there?" he asked. "No. Ever. Not that I have seen." Noah stared at it for several seconds before continuing down the hallway. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Later that evening, while organizing supplies in a storage room, I realized the mansion had become unusually quiet. Too quiet. Every parent knows that kind of silence. It usually means trouble. My heart jumped. "Noah." No answer. I stepped into the hallway. Noah. Still nothing. Panic began rising in my chest. I checked the library, the breakfast room, the sunroom. Empty. Then I heard voices. One small, one deep. I followed the sound toward the west hallway. Noah sat cross-legged on the carpet several feet from the locked door. Adrian stood nearby with his hands in his pockets. Neither seemed upset. In fact, they appeared to be having a conversation. "If nobody lives there," Noah was saying, "why keep their room?" Adrian looked at the door. "Because sometimes people leave, but you still love them." Noah frowned. "Like when Grandpa moved to Florida?" A faint smile touched Adrian's face. "Something like that." Noah considered this carefully. "I miss Grandpa." Adrian nodded. "I know." The simple exchange settled over the hallway like a blanket. For the first time, Adrian did not seem like a powerful businessman. He looked like someone remembering something. Someone carrying a weight that had never grown lighter. Noah slowly stood and walked closer to him. "Do you miss somebody?" Adrian did not answer right away. His eyes remained fixed on the door. Finally, he said, "Every day." The hallway became completely silent. Even Noah seemed to understand the importance of those words. Then something unexpected happened. Noah reached down and picked up Captain Pickles. Without hesitation, he held the stuffed bear out toward Adrian. "You can borrow him." Adrian blinked. "Borrow him? When you miss people?" Noah smiled. "He helps." For a second, Adrian simply stared at the little bear. Then he accepted it with surprising care, as though it were something fragile, something valuable, something he had not been offered in a very long time. And as I watched him standing beside that locked door holding a worn stuffed animal in his hands, I realized the walls around his heart were beginning to crack. The next few days felt different. Not dramatically different. The mansion still stood quiet against the skyline. Adrian still spent long hours inside his office. The staff still moved through the hallways with careful professionalism. Yet something subtle had changed. Captain Pickles had never been returned. At first, Noah did not seem concerned. "He is helping," he explained one evening while eating apple slices at the kitchen table. "Helping who?" I asked. Noah gave me a look that suggested I should already know the answer. "The lonely guy." Somehow, Captain Pickles had taken up permanent residence inside Adrian's office. I discovered this by accident when Mrs. Whitaker sent me upstairs with freshly pressed linens. The office door stood partially open. Adrian sat behind his desk reviewing documents while the stuffed bear occupied an expensive leather chair beside him. The sight was so unexpected that I almost laughed. Yet Adrian appeared completely unaware of how strange it looked. Or perhaps he simply did not care. Later that evening, as I dusted shelves in the library, Noah wandered in carrying a flashlight. "Adventure time," he announced. "Adventure time? We are explorers." He pointed dramatically toward the hallway. "There are mysteries." Before I could stop him, he marched out of the room. I followed several steps behind. Eventually, his expedition led him back to the west hallway. The locked door waited at the end exactly as always. Silent. Unchanged. Noah stood staring at it. "Do you think the room misses him too?" he asked. "Who?" "The person who left." I looked toward the door. "Maybe." Noah nodded thoughtfully. Then he said something that made my chest Titan. I think he is sad because he never says goodbye. Before I could ask what he meant, another voice answered from behind us. You might be right. Adrian stood several feet away. He looked tired. More tired than usual. The shadows beneath his eyes seemed darker. His tie had been loosened. The top button of his shirt undone. For the first time since I met him, he looked less like the owner of the mansion and more like an ordinary man carrying an ordinary burden. Noah walked over immediately. Did Captain Pickles help? Adrian looked down at him. A faint smile appeared. More than you know. Noah seemed pleased by this answer. He reached for Adrian's hand without hesitation. The gesture was so natural that neither of them appeared surprised. Together they walked slowly down the hallway. When they reached the locked door, Adrian stopped. His eyes rested on the polished wood. The smile disappeared. Silence settled around us. Then Noah asked the question. What was their name? Adrian did not move. For several seconds I thought he would refuse to answer. Instead he spoke so quietly I almost missed it. Benjamin. The name seemed to change the air itself. Noah squeezed his hand. Was he your friend? Adrian stared at the door. He was my little brother. My breath caught. Everything suddenly made sense. The locked room. The loneliness. The sadness hidden beneath years of discipline and control. Noah looked up at him. Do you still love him? Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. Then he nodded once. Very much. Noah smiled softly. Then he probably knows. Adrian looked away. Toward the windows at the far end of the hallway where evening light painted the floor gold. For the first time, I saw his eyes shine with emotion he could no longer completely hide. And in that moment, standing beside a locked room filled with memories, Adrian Moretti looked less like a man protecting the past and more like a man finally beginning to face it. The following Friday arrived with a steady spring rain that turned the city beyond the windows into a watercolor painting of silver and gray. The mansion felt unusually calm. Meetings had ended earlier than normal. The phones rang. Less often. Even the staff seemed to move more quietly than usual. By 9 o'clock, most of the lights in the east wing had already been dimmed. Noah had fallen asleep for nearly an hour in a reading nook beside the library fireplace. His small blanket was wrapped around him, and Captain Pickles was noticeably absent from his arms. As usual, somewhere along the way, the bear had unofficially become shared property. I finished folding linens in the guest wing and headed downstairs looking for Mrs. Whitaker. Instead, I found Adrian sitting alone in the family room. The room was larger than most apartments I had lived in. A stone fireplace glowed softly. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the rainy night. A lamp cast warm golden light across the leather furniture. Adrian sat on the sofa with several folders open beside him. Reading glasses rested low on his nose. For a moment, he looked almost ordinary. Almost. Everything all right? I asked quietly. He glanced up and nodded. Long week. I smiled politely. I understand that feeling. He looked toward the fireplace. I suspect you understand it better than most. The answer surprised me. Adrian rarely spoke about anything personal. Before I could respond, his eyes drifted toward the hallway leading to the library. Is Noah asleep? For now. A faint smile appeared. That usually means trouble is coming later. I laughed. That is actually very accurate. To my surprise, Adrian laughed too. Not loudly. Just enough to reveal a version of himself that few people ever saw. A version untouched by authority or responsibility. For a few seconds, the years seemed to fall away from him. Then the exhaustion returned. I noticed it immediately. The dark circles beneath his eyes. The tension in his shoulders. The way he occasionally rubbed one hand across his forehead when he thought nobody was looking. He looked completely drained. You should get some rest, I said before I could stop myself. Adrian looked down at the paperwork surrounding him. I will eventually. That sounds like something people say right before they work another 4 hours. His smile returned briefly. You may have a point. The rain tapped softly against the glass. The fire crackled. The room grew quiet. A comfortable quiet. The kind that rarely existed in a mansion this large. I excused myself to finish my duties upstairs. Nearly 40 minutes passed before I returned. When I entered the family room again, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The second was Adrian. He was still sitting on the sofa, except now his head rested against the cushion. One arm lay across his chest. The reading glasses remained slightly crooked. The folders had slipped onto the coffee table. For the first time since I had known him, he was asleep. Completely asleep. Not resting. Not thinking. not staring at city lights while carrying invisible burdens. Sleeping deeply enough that he had not noticed the paperwork sliding away from him. I stood frozen for a second. Something about the sight felt strangely vulnerable. This was a man who seemed permanently in control. A man who carried responsibility every waking hour. Yet here, illuminated by the fireplace, he simply looked tired. Human. I quietly stepped back toward the doorway. Then another small figure appeared beside me. Noah rubbed his eyes sleepily and looked into the room. He spotted Adrian immediately. His expression changed. Curious. Thoughtful. He did not say a word. He simply stared at the sleeping man on the sofa, then at the empty space beside him, then at the blanket still draped around his own shoulders. And the look that appeared on Noah's face told me he had already decided to do something. Noah slipped his small blanket from around his shoulders and held it tightly against his chest. The family room remained quiet except for the gentle crackle of the fireplace and the rain tapping against the windows. Adrian had not moved. His breathing was slow and even. The folders on the coffee table remained untouched. For once, the endless responsibilities waiting for him seemed far away. Noah looked up at me. He is cold. I lowered my voice. I think he is okay, sweetheart. Noah shook his head. People need blankets when they sleep. Before I could stop him, he padded across the room in his socks. Every step was careful, deliberate, like he instinctively understood that this moment mattered. He climbed onto the edge of the sofa and gently spread his little blanket across Adrian's chest. The blanket was much too small. It barely covered him. Yet Noah adjusted it several times until he seemed satisfied. Adrian stirred slightly, but did not wake. Noah smiled. Then he climbed down and disappeared into the hallway. A minute later, he returned carrying Captain Pickles. I watched silently as he approached the sofa again. What are you doing now? I whispered. Noah looked at me as though the answer was obvious. Nobody should sleep alone. He carefully placed the stuffed bear beside Adrian's arm. Then he stood there studying him. The firelight reflected in his green eyes. After several seconds, he leaned forward and spoke so softly that I almost missed it. You look sad when you sleep. My chest tightened. Adrian did not wake. Noah continued staring at him. It is okay. Captain Pickles is really good at helping. Then he gently patted Adrian's arm the same way I sometimes patted Noah when he had a bad dream. The innocence of the gesture nearly brought tears to my own eyes. We left the room a few moments later. Noah quickly fell asleep again in the reading nook, exhausted from his important mission. I finished my remaining tasks and eventually gathered our things to leave. Adrian was still sleeping when we departed. The next evening, rain had given way to clear skies. The city glittered beyond the windows like scattered diamonds. Noah and I arrived shortly after 5. As we entered the foyer, Mrs. Whitaker approached carrying a stack of correspondence. Her expression seemed unusually warm. Good evening, Emily. Good evening. She glanced down at Noah. Someone has been asking about you. Noah brightened immediately. Before I could ask who she meant, a familiar voice answered from the staircase. I was wondering when my consultant would arrive. We both looked up. Adrian stood near the landing. He looked more rested than I had ever seen him. Not completely rested, but different. Lighter somehow. Noah grinned. Captain Pickles did his job. Adrian descended the stairs slowly. In one hand, he carried the stuffed bear. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Adrian crouched slightly, so he was closer to Noah's height. I believe he did. Noah nodded proudly. I told you. Adrian looked at the bear before turning back toward Noah. Something shifted in his expression. A vulnerability I had never seen before. Thank you for the blanket. Noah shrugged. You looked lonely. The words landed softly. No accusation. No judgment. Just truth. Adrian looked away for a second. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. My brother used to do that. The foyer became completely still. Even Mrs. Whitaker stopped moving. Adrian stared at Captain Pickles. When I fell asleep on the couch, he would always bring me a blanket. Every single time. His voice caught slightly on the last word. The emotion was brief. Almost invisible. But it was there. For the first time in years, someone had unknowingly reached a memory Adrian had spent a very long time protecting. And standing there beneath the grand staircase, holding a worn stuffed bear in his hands, he looked as though his heart had finally remembered how to feel. The following Monday, the mansion felt different from the moment we arrived. Nothing visible had changed. The marble floors still reflected the chandelier light. The paintings still hung perfectly straight. The grand staircase still curved toward the upper floors like something from a movie. Yet the atmosphere was warmer, softer, as though a window had been opened after years of stale air. Noah noticed it immediately. "The house looks happier," he announced. I smiled. "Houses do not have feelings, remember?" Noah gave me the same patient look he always used when he thought adults were missing something obvious. "This one does." Throughout the evening, little surprises kept appearing. Fresh flowers stood in the breakfast room. Music drifted quietly from hidden speakers. The library fireplace had already been lit before sunset. Small things, ordinary things. Yet somehow they transformed the mansion. Around 7 o'clock, Mrs. Whitaker approached me carrying a silver key resting on a velvet cloth. Her hands trembled slightly. "He asked me to bring this." I stared at the key. "What is it?" Before she could answer, Adrian's voice came from the hallway. "It opens a door that has been closed for 8 years. My breath caught. Noah immediately looked toward the west hallway. Adrian stood there waiting. Not tense, not guarded, simply waiting. Noah took his hand without hesitation. Together we walked down the corridor. The familiar door stood at the end exactly where it always had. For weeks it had felt like part of the mansion itself. Untouchable, frozen in time. Adrian stopped before it and looked at the key in Mrs. Whitaker's hand. The elderly house manager lowered her eyes. "Are you certain?" she asked softly. Adrian nodded. "It is time." The lock clicked. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Slowly, the door opened. Dust-free sunlight from the windows inside spilled into the hallway. I had expected darkness. Instead, I found a room preserved with extraordinary care. Books lined the shelves. Framed photographs sat neatly arranged on a desk. Model airplanes hung from the ceiling. A baseball glove rested on a chair. Everything looked exactly as if someone had stepped out and never returned. Noah walked inside first. His eyes widened. "Wow." Adrian remained near the doorway. His gaze moved across the room. Every object seemed connected to a memory only he could see. Finally, Noah pointed toward a photograph sitting beside the bed. "That is him." Adrian nodded. The picture showed a smiling young man with kind eyes. There was a resemblance. Not in appearance alone. Something deeper. Something impossible to explain. Noah studied the photo carefully. Then he smiled. "He looks nice." Adrian laughed quietly. A genuine laugh. The kind that came from somewhere deep inside. He was. Silence settled over the room. Not painful silence. Peaceful silence. The kind that arrives after a storm has finally passed. Then Noah did something only Noah could do. He placed Captain Pickles beside the photograph. "Just for a little while," he explained. "So he does not get lonely either." Adrian closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they shimmered with emotion. This time he did not look away. He did not hide it. He simply accepted it. Accepted the memory. Accepted the loss. Accepted the love that had never disappeared. As the evening sun painted the room gold, I realized something remarkable had happened. Noah had not fixed Adrian. He had not erased grief. He had not changed the past. He had simply reminded a lonely man that love does not end when someone leaves. Sometimes it waits quietly behind a locked door until the right person comes along and helps you open it again. And as we stood together inside a room that had been closed for 8 years, the mansion no longer felt like a monument to sorrow. It felt like a home. Because in the end, Adrian Moretti owned more wealth than most people could imagine. But the greatest gift he received came from a 3-year-old boy carrying a stuffed bear and enough kindness to unlock a heart that had been closed even longer than the door.